Hello and welcome back to the Gentleman Psychic. I am just going to do all of my shares just a moment. It says I'm live, and I don't know why I can never remember how to do this. So let me see if I can. You would think that I would know, but I never remember. Let me see. Your library, your videos. No, live. Pause that one, and then. Let's see. Nope, let's see. Why can I not remember where that is? I do this every week. I can never remember where I am. Oh, share. There we go. Copy that. Send this over here to the Facebook page. Let me see. Create a new post. Here we go. Join me for story time, and we share that one, and we publish that one. Hi, Christy. Hi, Turtlefina, Jabnel Flores, Mason. Hello, everybody. And now I'm just going to share over here on the regular Facebook. Paste. Join me live for story time. All right. So, first of all, my lovelies, I beg your pardon. I know it seems a little bit darker. That's because this lamp has decided it wants to flicker on me. So, hopefully, I'm going to turn it on for now, and if it continues, I shall have to turn it back off. But that is what it is doing now. Raven Delaney, hey, just in time, feeling really down this evening. I am so sorry to hear that. Anyway, I am glad you are here. I am glad that all of you are here. I know we only have a few people here right now, so we're going to talk a little bit about announcements. I am now doing readings at the Crystal and Sage over in Oyster Bay. If you are around. Anyway, so Turtle is asking, I'm certain Raven Delaney just feeling really down. Well, I'm really sorry to hear that, and I don't know what is going on, but I am glad you're here. You can private message me later if you like. So I want to make certain that you are doing well. Other announcements. I'm supposed to be in Salem the week before Halloween, so that will be fun. My light is acting up. It's going to go off, I think, pretty shortly. And I'm sorry, my hair is a little bit of a mess. Anyway, last week I was unable to read. I don't remember now why, but I apologize for the delay. Anyway, now that we've gotten a few people, I'm afraid that's going to give you it's going to give you epilepsy, that strobing effect. Anyway, we will. Oh, thank you, Turtle. I appreciate that. We are about halfway through. I had ordered, and I think it went to the wrong address. I had ordered the sequel to this, the Wheels of the Devil, or I can't remember. Okay, come on. Let's see. Okay, good. I think good story time flickering. Thank you. Well, it's not easy to read with the flicker of the lamp. If it were an actual, like a kerosene lamp or an oil lamp, it might be very romantic. But it gives me a little bit of a. Okay. Well, we'll be in the dark. Maybe not. Okay. Chapter 22. The Sorrows of Satan. On the afternoon of the 21st of May, I went down, accompanied by Lucio, to Willowsmere. Turn that one off. On the afternoon of the 21st of May, I went down, accompanied by Lucio, to Willowsmere, to be in readiness for the reception of the social swarm who were to flock thither the next day. Amiel went with us, but I left my own man Morris behind to take charge of my rooms in the Grand and to forward late telegrams and special messages. The weather was calm, warm, and bright, and a young moon showed her her thin crescent in the sky as we got out at the country station and stepped into the open carriage awaiting us. The station officials greeted us with servile humility, eyeing Lucio especially with an almost gaping air of wonderment. The fact of his lavish expenditure in arranging with the railway company a service of special trains for the use of the morrow's guests had no doubt excited them to the speechless extent of admiration as well as astonishment. When we approached Willowsmere and entered the beautiful drive, bordered with oak and beech, which led up to the house, I uttered an exclamation of delight at the festal decorations displayed, for the whole avenue was spanned with arches of flags and flowers, garlands of blossoms being even swung from the tree to tree, and interlacing many of the lower branches. The gabled porch at the entrance of the house was draped with crimson silk and festooned with white roses, and as we alighted, the door was flung open by a smart page in brilliant scarlet and gold. "I think," said Lucio to me as we entered, "you will find everything as complete as the world's resources will allow. The retinue of servants here are what is vaguely called on the job. Their payment is agreed upon, and they know their duties thoroughly. They will give you no trouble." I could scarcely find words to express my unbounded satisfaction or to thank him for the admirable taste with which the beautiful house had been adorned. I wandered about in ecstasy of admiration, triumphing in such visible and gorgeous display of what great wealth could really do. The ballroom had been transformed into an elegant bijou theatre, the stage being concealed by a curtain of thick gold-colored silk, on which the oft-quoted lines of Shakespeare were embroidered in raised letters. "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players." Turning out of this into the drawing-room, I found it decorated entirely round with banks of roses, red and white, the flowers forming a huge pyramid at one end of the apartment, being which, as Lucio informed me, unseen musicians would discourse sweet harmony. "I have arranged a few tableaux vivants in the theatre to fill up the gap of time," he said carelessly. "Fashionable folks nowadays get so soon tired of one amusement that it is necessary to provide several in order to distract the brains that cannot think, or discover any means of entertainment in themselves. As a matter of fact, people cannot even converse long together because they have nothing to say. Oh, don't bother to go out in the grounds on a tour of inspection just now. Leave a few surprises for yourself as well as for your company tomorrow. Come and have dinner." He put his arm through mine, and we entered the dining room. Here the table was laid out with costly fruit, flowers, and delicious of every description. 4 men-servants, in scarlet and gold, stood silently in waiting, with Amiel in black, as usual, behind his master's chair. We enjoyed sumptuous repast, served to perfection, and when it was finished, we strolled out in the grounds to smoke and talk. "You seem to do everything by magic, Lucio," I said, looking at him wonderingly. "All these lavish decorations, these servants." "Money, my dear fellow. Nothing but money." He interrupted with a laugh. "Money, the devil's passkey. You can have the retinue of the king without a king responsibilities, if you only choose to pay for it. It is merely a question of cost and taste, I reminded him. True, and taste. Some rich men there are who have less taste than a costermonger. I know one who has the egregious vulgarity to call the attention of his guests to the value of his goods and chattels. He pointed out for my admiration one day an antique and hideous china plate, the only one of that kind in the world, and told me it was worth 1,000 guineas. Break it, I said coolly. You will then have the satisfaction of knowing you have destroyed 1,000 guineas worth of undesirable ugliness. You should have seen his face. He showed me no more curios. I laughed, and we walked slowly up and down for a few minutes in silence. Presently, I became aware that my companion was looking at me intently, and I turned my head quickly to meet his eyes. He smiled. I was just then thinking, he said, what you would have done with your life if you had not inherited this fortune, and if, if I had not come your way. I should have starved, no doubt, I responded, died like a rat in a hole, of want and wretchedness. Oh, I rather doubt that, he said meditatively. It is just possible you might have become a great writer. And why do you say that now? I asked. Because I've been reading your book. There are fine ideas in it, ideas that might, had they been the result of sincere conviction, have reached the public in time, because they were sane and healthy. The public will never put up for long with corrupt fads and artificial crazes. Now you write of God, yet, according to your own statement, you did not believe in God, even when you wrote the words that imply his existence. And that was long before I met you. Therefore, the book was not the result of sincere conviction, and that's the keynote of your failure to reach the large audience you desired. Each reader can see you do not believe what you write. The trumpet of lasting fame never sounds triumph for an author of that caliber. Don't let us talk about it, it's for heaven's sake, I said irritably. I know my work lacks something. I do not want to think about it. Let it perish as it assuredly will. Perhaps in the future I may do something better. He was silent, and finished his cigar, threw the end away in the grass where it burned like a dull red coal. I must turn in, he then observed. I have a few more directions to give to the servants for tomorrow. I shall go to my room as soon as I have done so. I'll say good night. But surely you're not taking too much personal trouble, I said. Can't I help you in any way? No, you can't, he answered smilingly. When I undertake to do anything, I like to do it in my own fashion or not at all. Sleep well and rise early. He nodded and sauntered slowly away over the dewy grass. I watched his dark, tall figure receding till he had entered the house. Then, lighting a fresh cigar, I wandered on alone through the grounds. Nothing here and there, flowery arbors and dainty silk pavilions erected in picturesque nooks and corners for the morrow. I looked up at the sky. It was clear and bright. There would be no rain. Presently I opened the wicket gate that led into the outer by the road, and walking on slowly, almost unconsciously, I found myself in a few minutes opposite Lily Cottage. Approaching the gate, I looked in. The pretty old house was dark, silent, and deserted. I knew Mavis Clare was away, and it was not strange that the aspect of her home nest emphasized the fact of her absence. A cluster of climbing roses hanging from the wall looked as if they were listening for the first sound of her returning footsteps. Across the green breadth of the lawn, where I had seen her playing with her dogs, a tall sheaf of St. John lilies stood up white against the sky, their pure hearts open to the starlight and the breeze. The scent of honeysuckle and sweet briar filled the air with delicate suggestions, and as I leaned over the low fence, gazing vaguely at the long shadows of the trees on the grass, a nightingale began to sing. The sweet yet dolorous warble of the little brown lover of the moon palpitated on the silence in silver-toned drops of melody, and I listened, till my eyes smarted with a sudden moisture as of tears. Strangely enough, I never thought of my betrothed bride, Sybil, then, as surely by all the precedents of passion I should have done at such a moment of dreamful ecstasy. It was another woman's face that floated before my memory, a face not beautiful, but merely sweet, and made radiant by the light of two tender, wistful, wonderfully innocent eyes, a face that of some new Daphne, with mystic laurels springing from her brows. The nightingale sang on and on. The tall lilies swayed in the faint wind as their nodding wise approval of the bird's wild music. And gathering one briar rose from the hedge, I turned away with curious heaviness in my heart, a trouble I could not analyze or account for. I explained my feeling partly to myself as one of the regret that I had ever taken up my pen to assault, with sneer and flippant jest, the gentle and brilliantly endowed owner of this little home, where peace and pure content dwelt happily in student-like seclusion. But this was not all. There was something else in my mind, something inexplicable and sad, which then I had no skill to define. I know now what it was, but the knowledge comes too late. Returning to my own domains, I saw through the trees a vivid red light in one of the upper windows at Willowsmere. It twinkled like a lurid star, and I guided my steps by its brilliancy as I made my way across the winding garden paths and terraces back to the house. Entering the hall, the page in scarlet and gold met me, and, with respectful obedience, escorted me to my room, where Amiel was in waiting. "Has the prince retired?" I asked him. "Yes, sir." "He has a red lamp in his window, has he not?" Amiel looked differently meditative, yet I fancied I saw him smile. "I think, yes, I believe he has, sir." I asked no more questions, but allowed him to perform his duties as valet in silence. "Good night, sir," he said at last. His ferret eyes fastened upon me with an expressionless look. "Good night," I responded indifferently. He left the room with his usual cat-like stealthy tread, and when he had gone, I, moved by a sudden fresh impulse of hatred for him, sprang to the door and locked it. Then I listened, with an odd, nervous breathlessness. There was not a sound, nor fully quarter of an hour I remained with my attention more or less strained, expectant of I knew not what, but the quiet of the house was absolutely undisturbed. With a sigh of relief, I flung myself on the luxurious bed, a couch fit for a king, draped with the richest satin elaborately embroidered, and falling soundly asleep, I dreamed that I was poor again, poor, but unspeakably happy, and hard at work in the old lodging, writing down thoughts which I knew by some divine intuition had beyond all doubt would bring me the whole world's honor. Again, I heard the sounds of the violin played by my unseen neighbor next door, and this time they were triumphal chords and cadences of joy, without one throb of sorrow. And while I wrote on in ecstasy of inspiration, oblivious of poverty and of pain, I heard echoing through my visions the round warble of the nightingale, and saw, in the far distance, an angel floating towards me on pinions of light, with the face of Mavis Clare. Chapter 23. The morning broke clear, with all the pure tints of a fine opal radiating in the cloudless sky. Never had I beheld such a fair scene as the woods and gardens of Willowsmere. When I looked upon them that day, illumined by the unclouded sunlight of spring half melting into summer, my heart swelled with pride as I surveyed the beautiful domain I now owned, and thought how happy a home it would make when Sybil, matchless in her loveliness, shared with me its charm and luxury. Yes, I said half aloud, say what philosophers will, the possession of money does ensure satisfaction and power. It is all very well to talk about fame, but what is fame worth if, like Carlyle, one is too poor to enjoy it? Besides, literature no longer holds its former high prestige. There are too many in the field, too many newspaper scribblers, all believing they are geniuses, too many educated lady paragraphists and new women who think they are as gifted as George Sand or Mavis Clare. With Sybil and Willismere, I ought to be able to resign the idea of fame, literary fame, with a good grace. I knew I reasoned falsely with myself. I knew that my hankering for a place among the truly great of the world was as strong as ever. I knew I craved the intellectual distinction, force, and pride which make the thinker a terror and a power in the land. And so severs a great poet of great romanticists from the commoner throng, that even kings are glad to do him her honor, to him or her honor. But I would not allow my thoughts to dwell on this rapidly vanishing point of unattainable desire. I settled my mind to enjoy the luscious flavor of the immediate present, as a bee settles in the cup of honey flowers. And, leaving my bedroom, I went downstairs to breakfast with Lucio in the best and gayest of humours. Not a cloud on the day, he said, meeting me with a smile as I entered the bright morning room whose windows opened on the lawn. The feat will be a brilliant success, Geoffrey. Thanks to you, I answered. Personally, I'm quite in the dark as to your plans, but I believe you can do nothing that is not well done. You do honor me, he said with a light laugh. You credit me with the better qualities than the Creator. For what he does, in the opinion of the present generation, is exceedingly ill done. Men have taken to grumbling at him instead of praising him, and few have any presence with or liking his laws. I laughed. Well, you must admit those laws are very arbitrary. Oh, they are. I entirely acknowledge the fact. We sat down to the table and were waited upon by admirably trained servants who apparently had no idea of anything else but attendance on our needs. There was no trace of bustle or excitement in the household, no sign whatever to denote, or no sign whatever to denote that great entertainment was about to take place that day. It was not until the close of our meal that I asked Lucio what time the musicians would arrive. He glanced at his watch. About noon, I should say. He replied, perhaps before, but whatever the hour, they will be there in their places at the proper moment. Depend upon it. The people I employ, both musicians and artists, know their business thoroughly and are aware that I stand no nonsense. A rather sinister smile played round his mouth as he regarded me. None of your guests can arrive here till 1 o'clock, as that is about the time the special train will bring the first batch of them from London. And the first déjeuner will be served in the gardens at 2. If you want to amuse yourself, there's a maypole being up in the large lawn. You'd better go and look at it. A maypole, I exclaimed. Now that's a good idea. Oh, it used to be a good idea, he answered, when English lads and lasses had youth, innocence, health, and fun in their composition. A dance round the maypole, hand in hand, did them good and did nobody harm. But now there are no lads and lasses. Enervated old men and old women in their teens walk in the world wearily, speculating on the uses of life, probing vice and sneering down sentiment, and such innocent diversions as the maypole no longer appeal to our jaded youth. So, we have to get professionals to execute the May revels. Of course, the dancing is better done by properly trained legs, but it means nothing and is nothing except a pretty spectacle. And are there dancers here? I asked, rising and going towards the window in some curiosity. No, not yet, but the maypole is fully decorated. It faces the woods at the back of the house. Go on and you'll see it if you like it. I followed his suggestion, and going in the direction indicated, I soon perceived the gaily decked object which used to be the welcome signal of many a village holiday in Shakespeare's old world England. The pole was already set up and fixed in deep socket in the ground, and a dozen or more men were at work, unbinding its numerous trails of blossom and garlands of green, tied with long streamers of various colored ribbon. It had a picturesque feel in the center of the wild lawn bordered with grand old trees, and approaching one of the men, I said something to him by way of approval and admiration. He glanced at me furtively and unsmilingly, but said nothing. And I concluded from his dark and foreign cast of features that he did not understand the English language. I noted with some wonder and slight vexation that all the workmen were of the same alien and sinister type of countenance, very much after the unattractive models of MIL and the two grooms who had my racer Phosphor in charge. But I remembered that Lucio had told me, namely, that all the designs for the feat were carried out by foreign experts and artists, and after a little puzzled consideration, I let the matter pass from my mind. The morning hours flew swiftly by, and I had little time to examine all the festival preparations with which the gardens abounded, so that I was almost as ignorant of what was in store for the amusement of my guests as the guests themselves. I had the curiosity to wait about and watch for the coming of the musicians and dancers, but I might as well have spared myself the waste of time and trouble, for I never saw them arrive at all. At 1 o'clock, both Lucio and I were ready to receive our company, but about 20 minutes past the hour, the first installment of Swagger Society was emptied into the grounds. Sybil and her father were among these, and I eagerly advanced to meet and greet the bride-elect as she alighted from the carriage that had brought her from the station. She looked supremely beautiful that day, and was, as she deserved to be, the censure of all eyes. I kissed her little gloved hand with a deeper reverence than I would have kissed the hand of a queen. Welcome back to your old home, my Sybil, I said to her in a low voice, tenderly, at which the words she paused, looking up at the red gables of the house with such wistful affection as filled her eyes with something like tears. She left her hand in mine and allowed me to lead her towards the silken-draped, flower-decked porch, where Lucio waited, smiling, and as she advanced, 2 tiny pages in pure white and silver glided suddenly out of some unseen hiding place and emptied 2 baskets of pink and white rose leaves at her feet, thus strewing a fragrant pathway for her into the house. They vanished as completely and swiftly as they appeared. Some of the guests uttered murmurs of admiration, while Sybil gazed about her, blushing with surprise and pleasure. "How charming of you, Geoffrey," she murmured. "What a poet you are to devise so pretty a greeting." "I wish I deserved your praise," I answered, smiling at her. "But the poet in question is Prince Ximenes. He is the master and ruler of today's revels." Again, the rich color flushed her cheeks, and she gave Lucio her hand. He bowed over it in a courtly fashion, but did not kiss it, as he had kissed the hand of Mavis Clare. We passed into the house, through the drawing-room, and out again into the garden, Lord Eldon being loud in his praise of the artistic manner in which his former dwelling had been improved and embellished. Soon the lawn was sprinkled with gaily attired groups of people, and my duties as host began in the hard earnest. I had to be greeted, complimented, flattered, congratulated on my approaching marriage by scores of hypocrites who nearly shook my hand off their enthusiasm for my wealth. Had I become suddenly poor, I thought grimly, not one of them would have lent me a sovereign. The guests kept on arriving in shoals, and when there were about 300 or 400 assembled, a burst of exquisite music sounded, and a procession of pages in scarlet and gold, marching two by two, appeared carrying trays full of the rarest flowers tied up in bouquets, which they offered to all the ladies present. Exclamations of delight arose on every side, exclamations which were, for the most part, high-pitched and noisy, for the swagger set have long ceased to cultivate softness of voice or refinement of accent, and once or twice the detestable slang word ripping escaped from the lips of a few dashing dames, reputed to be leaders of style. Repose of manner, dignity, and elegance of deportment, however, are no longer to be discovered among the present racing duchesses and gambling countesses of the bluest blue blood of England. So one does not expect these graces of distinction from them. The louder they can talk, and the more slang they can adopt from the language of their grooms and stable boys, the more they are judged to be in the swim and up to date. I speak, of course, of the modern scions and of aristocracy. There are a few truly great ladies left whose maxim is still noblesse oblige, but they are quite in the minority, and by the younger generation are voted either old cats or boors. Many of the cultured mob that now swarmed over my grounds had come out of the sheerest vulgar curiosity to see what the man with 5 millions could do in way of entertaining. Others were anxious to get news, if possible, of the chances of Phosphor winning the Derby, concerning which I was discreetly silent. But the bulk of the crowd wandered aimlessly about, staring impertinently or enviously at each other, and scarcely looking at the natural loveliness of the gardens or the woodland scenery around them. The brainlessness of modern society is never so flagrantly manifested as at a garden party, where the restless-trousered and petticoated bipeds moved vaguely to and fro, scarcely stopping to talk civilly or intelligently to one another for 5 minutes, most of them hovering dubiously and awkwardly between the refreshment pavilion and the bandstand. In my domain, they were deprived of this latter harbor of refuge, for no musicians could be seen through the music, though the music was heard. Beautiful, wild music, which came first from one part of the grounds and then from another, and to which few listened with any attention. All were, however, happily unanimous in their enthusiastic appreciation of the excellence of food provided for them in the luxurious luncheon tents, of which there were 20 in number. Men ate as if they had never eaten in their lives before, and drank the choice, exquisite wines with equal greed and gusto. One never entirely realizes the extent to which human gourmandism can go till one knows few peers, bishops, cabinet ministers, and watches those dignitaries feed ad libitum. Soon the company was so complete that there was no longer any need for me to perform the fatiguing duty of receiving, and I therefore took Sybil into the luncheon, determining to devote myself to her for the rest of the day. She was in one of her brightest and most captivating moods. Her laughter rang out as sweetly joyous as that of some happy child. She was even kind to Diana Chesney, who was also one of my guests, and who was plainly enjoying herself with all of the verve peculiar to pretty American women who consider flirtation as much of a game of as much as a game as tennis. The scene was now one of the great brilliancy, the light costumes of the women contrasting well with the scarlet and gold liveries of the seemingly innumerable servants that were now everywhere in active attendance. And constantly, through the fluttering festive crowd, from tent to tent, from table to table, and group to group, Lucio moved, his tall, stately figure and handsome face always conspicuous wherever he stood, his rich voice thrilling the air whenever he spoke. His influence was irresistible, and gradually dominated the whole assemblage. He roused the dull, inspired the witty, encouraged the timid, and brought all the conflicting elements of rival position, character, and opinion into one uniform whole, which was unconsciously led by his will as easily as a multitude is led by a convincing orator. I did not know it then, but I know it now, that, metaphorically speaking, he had his foot on the neck of that society mob, as though it were one prostrate man, that the sycophants, liars, and hypocrites whose utmost idea of good is wealth and luxurious living, bent to his secret power as reeds bend to the wind, and that he did with them all whatsoever he chose, as he does to this very day. God, if the grinning, guzzling, sensual fools had only known that what horrors were about them at the feast, what ghastly ministers to the pleasurable appetite waited obediently upon them, what pallid terrors lurked behind the gorgeous show of vanity and pride. But the veil was mercifully down, and only to me has it since been lifted. Luncheon over, the singing of mirthful voices turned to a kind of village roundelay, attracted the company, now fed to a repletion towards the lawn at the back of the house, and cries of delight were raised as the maypole came into view. I myself joining in the universal applause, for I had not expected to see anything half so picturesque and so pretty. The pole was surrounded by a double ring of small children, children so beautiful in face and dainty in form, that they might very well have been taken for little fairies from the enchanted woodland. The boys were clad as tiny foresters in doublets of green, with pink caps on their curly heads. The girls were in white, with their hair flowing loosely over their shoulders and wreaths of May blossoms crowning their brows. As soon as the guests appeared on the scene, these exquisite little creatures commenced their dance, each one taking a trail of blossom or a ribbon pendant from the maypole, and weaving it with the others into no end of beautiful and fantastic designs. I looked on, as amazed and fascinated as any one present, at the wonderful lightness and ease of which these children tripped and ran. Their tiny twinkling feet seemed scarcely to touch the turf. Their faces were so lovely, their eyes so bright, that it was a positive enchantment to watch them. Each figure they executed was more intricate and effective than the last, and the plaudits of the spectators grew more and more enthusiastic, till presently came the finale, in which all the little green foresters climbed up the pole and clung there, pelting the white-robed maidens below with cowslip balls, knots of roses, bunches of violets, posies of buttercups, daisies, and clover, which the girl children, in their turn, thick with flowers and heavy with perfume, and resounded with song and laughter. And Sybil, standing at my table, clapped her hands in ecstasy. "Oh, it's lovely! It is lovely!" she cried. "Is this the prince's idea?" Then, as I answered in affirmative, she added, "Where, I wonder, did he find such exquisitely pretty little children?" As she spoke, Lucio himself advanced a step or two in front of the other spectators, and made a slight peremptory sign. The fairy-like fosters and maidens, with extraordinary activity, all sprang away from the maypole, pulling down the garlands with them, and winding the flowers and ribbons about themselves, so that they looked as if they were all tied together in one inextricable knot. This done, they started off at a rapid run. Presently the appearance of rolling ball, of blossom, merry pipe music accompanying their footsteps till they had entirely disappeared among the trees. "Oh, do call them back again," entreated Sybil, laying her hand coaxingly on Lucio's arm. "I should so like to speak to 2 or 3 of the prettiest." He looked down at her with an enigmatical smile. "You would do them too much honour, Lady Sybil," he replied. "They are not accustomed to such condescension from great ladies, and would not appreciate it. They are paid professionals, and, like many of their class, only become insolent when praised." At that moment, Diana Chesney came running across the lawn, breathless. "I can't see them anywhere," she declared pantingly. "The dear little darlings, I ran after them as fast as I could. I wanted to kiss one of those perfectly little scrumptious boys, but they're all gone. Not a trace of them left. It's just as if they had sunk into the ground." Again, Lucio smiled. "They have their orders," he said curtly, "and they know their place." Just then, the sun was obscured by a passing black cloud, and a peal of thunder rumbled overhead. Looks were turned to the sky, but it was quite bright and placid save for that one floating shadow of a storm. "Only summer thunder," said some of the guests. "There will be no rain." And the crowd that had been pressed together to watch the maypole dance began to break up in groups and speculate as to what diversion might be next provided for them. I, watching my opportunity, drew Sybil away. "Come down by the river," I whispered. "I must have you to myself just for a few moments." She yielded to my suggestion, and we walked away from the mob of our acquaintance and entered a grove of trees leading to the banks of the part of the Avon which flowed through the grounds. Here we found ourselves quite alone, and putting my arm round the betrothed, I kissed her tenderly. "Tell me," I said, with half smile, "do you know how to love yet?" She looked up with a passionate darkness in her eyes that startled me. "Yes, I know," was her unexpected answer. "You do?" And I stopped to gaze intently into her fair face. "And how did you learn?" She flushed red, and then grew pale, and clung to me with a nervous, almost feverish force. "Very strangely," she replied, "and quite suddenly. The lesson was easy, I found, too easy, Geoffrey." She paused and fixed her eyes full on mine. "I will tell you how I learnt it, but not now, some other day." Here she broke off and began to laugh rather forcedly. "I will tell you when we are married." She glanced anxiously about her. Then, with a sudden abandonment of her usual reserve and pride, threw herself into my arms and kissed my lips with such ardour as made my senses reel. "Sybil, Sybil," I murmured, holding her close to my heart. "Oh, my darling, you do love me. At last you love me." "Shh, hush, hush," she said breathlessly. "You must forget that kiss. It was too bold of me. It was wrong. I did not mean it. I was thinking of something else. Geoffrey," and her small hand clenched on mine in a sort of eager fierceness, "I wish I had never learned to love. I was happier before I knew it." A frown knitted her brows. Now she went on in the same breathless, hurried way. "I want love. I am starving, thirsting for it. I want to be drowned in it, lost in it, killed by it. Nothing else will content me." I folded her still closer in my arms. "Did I not say you would change, Sybil?" I whispered. "Your coldness and insensibility to love was unnatural and could not last. My darling, I always knew that. You always knew," she echoed, a little disdainfully. "Ah, but you do not know, even now, what has chanced to me, nor shall I tell you yet, oh Geoffrey." Here she drew herself out of my embrace, and stooping, gathered some bluebells in the grass. "See these little flowers growing so purely and peacefully in the shade by the Avon? They remind me of what I was here in this very place long ago. I was quite as happy, and I think as innocent as the blossoms. I had no thought of evil in my nature, and the only love I dreamt of was the love of the fairy prince for the fairy princess, as harmless an idea as the loves of the flowers themselves. Yes, I was then all I should like to be now, all that I am not. You have everything that is beautiful and sweet, I told her admiringly, as I watched the play of retrospective and tender expression on her perfect face. So you judge, being a man who is perfectly satisfied with his own choice of a wife, she said, with a flash of her old cynicism. But I know myself better than you know me. You call me beautiful and sweet, but you cannot call me good. I am not good. Why, the very love that now consumes me is— What? I asked her quickly, seizing her hands with the bluebells in them, and gazing searchingly into her eyes. I know before you speak that it is the passion and tenderness of true woman. She was silent for a moment. Then she smiled a bewitching languor. If you know that I need not tell you, she said. So do not let us stay here any longer talking nonsense. Society will shake its head over us and accuse us of bad form, and some lady paragraphist will write the papers and say Mr. Tempest conducted as host left much to be desired, as he had his bride-elect was spooning all the day. There are no lady paragraphists here, I said, laughing, and encircling her dainty waist with one arm as I walked. Oh, there are not, though. Oh, are there not, though? She exclaimed, laughing also. Why, you don't suppose you can give any sort of big entertainment without them, do you? They permeate society. Old Lady Marvale, for example, who is rather reduced in circumstances, write a guinea's worth of scandal a week for one of the papers, and she is here. I saw her simply gorging herself with chicken salad and truffles an hour ago. Here, pausing and resting against my arm, she peered through the trees. There are the chimneys of Lily's cottage, where famous Mavis Clare lives, she said. Yes, I know, I replied readily. Jimenez and I have visited her. She is away just now, or would have been here today. Do you like her? Queried Sybil. Very much. She is charming. And the prince, does he like her? Well, upon my word, I answered with a smile, I think he likes her more than he does most women. He showed the most extraordinary deference to her, and seemed almost abashed in her presence. Are you cold, Sybil? I added hastily, she shivered suddenly, and her face grew pale. You'd better come away from the river. It is damp under these trees. Yes. Let's go back to the gardens and the sunshine, she answered dreamily. So your eccentric friend, the woman-hater, finds something to admire in Mavis Clare. She must be a very happy creature, I think, perfectly free, famous, and believing in all the good things of life and humanity, if one may judge from her books. Well, taken altogether, life isn't so very bad, I observed playfully. She made no reply, and we returned to the lawns, where afternoon tea was now being served to the guests who were seated in brilliant, scattered groups under the trees, or within silken pavilions, while the sweetest music, and the strangest, if people only had ears to hear it, both vocal and instrumental, was being performed by these invisible players and singers whose secret whereabouts was unknown to all save Lucio. That is where we end for the evening, my dear. Turtle says you are lost. Okay, let me recap. Okay. Geoffrey Tempest was poor. He became very wealthy. And then he met Prince Lucio, and then through Lucio met Lady Sybil and procured Willowsmere, which was her childhood home. They go about these sort of going together, trying to figure out how to win this woman, and hating Mavis Clare, the author. And then he meets Mavis Clare, the author, with Prince Lucio. They are now he's very much taken aback by the fact that she's beautiful and she's kind and she's good and she's lovely and she's famous and doesn't even try, and she's generous. So he invited her, Mavis Clare, to his wedding, and she had to go away for work. And now it seems that Lady Sybil is in fact in love with Lucio, and Lucio only respects Mavis Clare. That's sort of an abridged version as to everything that we read. If you are enjoying my show, if you are enjoying this book, you can keep my show alive. You can join me on Patreon. That's the best way. Patreon.com/The Gentleman Psychic. You can also find me on PayPal at rlillard6@gmail.com, Venmo at Richard-Lael-Lillard, Richard-Lael Lillard, my full name. Anyway, my lovelies, it is near 11 o'clock p.m. on the East Coast, and thank you for joining me, everyone who did. I so appreciate all of your likes, your comments, your shares. It means the world to me. All right, darlings, I bid you till next time. Beautiful dreams. Bonne nuit.